Hello, everybody. It's Dave Robles with Think Real Estate, bringing you episode 36 of the Great California Corona Staycation Show. Today, I am bringing on a guest who is from our sister city, the Big Apple, New York City. I've got John Harrison with Core New York here on the show. John, welcome, my friend.
Thank you so much. I'm certainly pleased to be here. You're quite the guy, and I've loved watching some of your episodes of the Staycation show. So I'm thrilled to be here.
Thanks, bud. I've always been a fan of yours. And when I think of New York real estate, I think John Harrison. So I
Oh,
wanted to
thanks.
do a show that, because, it's our sister city. Yeah,
Yep.
and
Yep.
I'd love to share what's going on in New York City. And first, tell everybody a little bit about you. I know you're Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens. Tell us a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I've been living in the city for approximately 15 years now. I can't believe how fast time flies. Came from a real estate family. My dad started working in real estate in the mid 80s, and I got involved, some helping him many years ago, and then got involved in real estate investment. Moved to New York City, and I've got to say, because I've transacted in other states as well, when you start going through your licensing and you start looking at how things work in New York, you realize we are, even though we're on the East, you're on the West, we are a bit like the Wild West on many levels.
Oh,
We don't have a standard MLS. We still have ways of getting things done, but New York City is already quite peculiar when you compare how things are done, and it's not always in a better way, but it's very unique. We just to give you kind of a big overview, we've got a little less than 9 million people living in the city. Approximately 2/3 of all of our residents are renting, and so the idea, people watch the TV shows and they see like the big commissions and high sales volume and stuff like that, but the reality is that 2/3 of the people are renting.
yep.
And the majority of the sales that happen in these vertical market buildings. It's condominiums and co-ops. So there aren't a whole lot of single family homes.
Right.
So just the whole approach, it takes much longer to close a deal. From the time you've got a signed contract, it can take 60 to 90 days. Just in a typical deal, we've got like board packages and everything else. But right now, we're experiencing this crazy thing where we had a slow year last year. It started to pick up a little bit.
Uh-huh.
The market was down January, February, and then we become the epicenter of all of this other stuff that's going on. And so it's taking like an already unique city and it's just spinning it on its head. And now it's over the top, just how much change has happened in such a short period of time.
Did it feel like, like in early Corona, that New Yorkers, who are a tough breed, in my opinion, were like not worrying so much about it and then like flipped real quick?
Yeah, I think, New York is a city, maybe New York is a state. It's a tough place.
Yeah.
And I love it. I love the city. I love living in the city. I live in Brooklyn. My kids go to school in Brooklyn. My wife teaches in Brooklyn, and I do deals in Brooklyn. My offices are mostly in Manhattan. So, most of my work is kind of in and around the core Manhattan, parts of Brooklyn, parts of Queens area. But what I've noticed about all the people that I've gotten to interact with and work with is that they're tough. And so here we have this almost like an international capital of sorts with all of these people that come through. It's a very vigorous kind of place to live, a lot of activity. And so I feel like there was a little bit of, that's not going to affect us kind of mentality because we've gone through so much before already. It's a very international market. So we do have people that are coming in. I've got close personal friends that are involved in a number of think tanks and really tied into the global community of international politics and international welfare. And so, I feel like we're close to the message, so we hear what's going on in other parts of the world, but it took a little bit of time, I think, for us to realize just how heavy this really was.
how shut down did New York real estate become? I mean, like, did it come to a complete halt or what?
It came to a halt. So I do resales, and I also do one of my big projects right now is a new development construction project that's right in the middle of Manhattan. It came to a halt, but it came to a halt in a few ways. The Real Estate Board of New York got some of its mandate. There were mandates that came from the mayor of New York as well as the governor of New York. And, you know, at first, real estate was considered a non-essential business.
Right.
Again, that's a broad statement, given that, remember, 2/3 of the people in New York City are renting, which means there's already a little bit of volatility in their living situation. Some people were already moving out. Some people are students. Schools were shut down. So if they're students, they had to move. I mean, there are a lot of things that happened to where then they said, okay, well, New York City, or at least New York, real estate can be essential, but you're just as an agent, you can't physically go to anybody, you know, you can't physically do showings. And then there were some other minor nuances where they said, well, you can only if it's absolutely legally necessary. And so I feel like as a community, we've been sort of towing the line, trying to figure out what that means. But for the most part, all of the physical showings, I say most of the physical showings have come to a halt. Construction stopped. I know last week, I think like construction picked back up again for schools in the city and maybe a couple of other things. But like my project, I'm selling Rockefeller Group's first ever residential project in Manhattan. We stopped construction. You know, a lot of things just froze all over the city. So I'm walking down the street one day, seeing a little bit of vigor and, you know, activity, and then you're realizing these very popular streets are ghost towns.
Right.
And it's eerie. And it was really, really eerie just to see the thriving community that is New York City turn into almost ghost town. Now there are pockets of people out and about, but it's nothing like what it was.
Oh yeah, I've seen the pictures of Times Square, you know, empty.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, that's shocking. You know, when I show a house here in LA, I can show up to the house, access the lockbox, open it up, stand outside, buyers come, everyone's gloved and masked, and they walk in and they don't touch anything and they leave, and not get the right an offer. So we're still able to do that, but I can't imagine how that translates to conducting business and showing a place in New York. And like you said, no showing. So apparently it just doesn't happen.
Well, there are some, I mean, we're definitely using more virtual technologies now. There are some ways that we can get people in. In theory, you know, if it's a doorman building or there's a concierge, you could leave a key for a buyer or a renter to come and get the key, in theory. And in theory, there wouldn't be any laws broken by doing that, because real estate, the nature of real estate in terms of like people having to buy or surrender a place to live, is considered legal. And so they can go directly in. But the practicalities of that are really, really tough. We have a lot of doorman buildings, and we don't do lock boxes anyway, because a buyer and their agent coming in off the street typically have to be escorted into one of these private buildings, because once you get in, like when you get in the front door, that's as if you now have a key right up to what is otherwise expected to be a very private, like a gated community.
Right.
And so that makes it tough. On top of that, some buildings have elected to prohibit anyone moving in or moving out. So forget about whether or not the lease or the sale is pending. Some buildings have elected to prohibit it. And some buildings in their boards have even said, if you've got something that you're trying to sell, you can't show. You've got to just wait.
Just wait. Just wait. So are new listings coming on the market?
So yes. So it's funny because here I am talking almost about like the doom and gloom of some of the things that are happening. But the reality is there are still people that have to sell. I mean, if we look at what happened to the stock market, a lot of people lost their value tremendously, and they made smart earlier decisions by investing in real estate. And so some of them have to sell, and some of those are investments. Some of them have to sell because they've decided they just, you know, they need to downsize. Some people are upsizing because they realize there's a bit of an opportunity right now to strike while interest rates are low and while they can buy a more expensive thing for a lower price point. So they'll take the calculated loss on something smaller so they can take a more calculated gain. So there are still some deals that are happening. I think that we just have to do them like right off the bat. We're doing more virtual collection of assets. So 360 and 3D tours, images, videos, and we're working through what it means for a buyer to see it. Where there's a lot more vetting that takes place before a buyer would ever go to inspect something if an inspection is absolutely necessary. And so I think more decisions are being made remotely, but the answer is yes, we still have things coming onto the market. Now we had a high market last year where there was a lot of supply. Right now we're about 30% lower than we were this time of year last year. And it's sometimes you can lie with numbers, and sometimes it's hard to figure out what numbers really mean, because in New York City we have a lagging market. It takes like sometimes 3 months before you even get a recorded sale to show up in our charts. But what we see is that there was, a lot of people have just pulled their homes off the market. Mm-hmm. Even though, last year there was a lot of inventory, but a lot of people just pulled their homes off the market. Our days on market is frozen right now in some of the systems. And so I think some people are just trying to figure out the whole wait and see. But again, yes, like we have something that we brought onto the market. The team brought onto the market this last week, and there's already interest in it. We had the owner, do like a tour, like a walkthrough tour using the Zillow app. And I mean, there's still stuff that we can do.
There's definitely a thirst for real estate from a buyer perspective here in LA too.
Are you seeing a lot of people that are like striking at the opportunity in LA, just coming from a cash strong position and realizing like, oh, this is a great time to buy? Well, like, how is that happening?
Yeah, there definitely are those buyers. There are buyers who saw this as, well, this is the time I can pick up a really good deal. Yeah. But I don't think there's a ton of good deals to be had right now.
Okay.
Now, back in mid-March, and I'm going to say March 19th, when we went into stay-at-home mode here in California, the week after that, the couple weeks after that, there were some good deals to be had.
Gotcha.
Escrows canceled, and buyers who were in escrow renegotiated their sale, or they would cancel. So right. I think there were very scared sellers at that moment who did things they wouldn't have done today, and lowered their price and made concessions. But I don't see there being a drop in prices right now. Yeah. There are less buyers, but there's also less houses. So they may have kind of dropped in.
Interesting. Yeah, a nice equilibrium of sorts.
Yeah, in a weird way. Have you guys seen anything similar? Have you heard of like transactions that were in play, and then when the shit hit the fan, so to speak, then people started negotiating again?
Yeah, so I have seen some of that, and I stay, not just in deals where I'm involved, but across the city, we try to stay pretty plugged in. And I've heard of buyers that have walked away from some deposits just because they had to preserve the rest of the money they had. And then I've heard of some buyers that are sort of on the fence about certain things, because they are very gung-ho at buying, but they just want to wait until business resumes. There are different thresholds of comfort that people have. And so I think it's important to figure out on a high level, on a macro level, what are those types of thresholds that most people expect? And then there's this social threshold, or the social comfort that a person has to have, the social kind of psychological, emotional, where we've got to figure out, we can look at all of our numbers and stats and talk about how things should be, and hey, no big deal, listen, the market's moving, it's a good time to buy. But ultimately, we have to take everything we know about the market and what we consider to be a good deal, you and I, and step into this world that for some people, they are just in a place of fear, just absolute fear. And so even though you and I may see somebody who is about to walk away from a deposit on a really great priced home, or they're about to sell now out of panic because they are dropping the price, they have to sell out of panic, we have to look holistically at that individual. We have to recognize like, okay, I'm sure if you just wait a few more months, you can get more money. But right now it may be for them, that is a bigger risk financially because they have other spreadsheets they're looking at.
Right.
They have other assets. And so that's the thing that I think all of us as agents and brokers can go through now, is to recognize that we're just in a different world. And so even though maybe the world hasn't fallen apart entirely, because deals are still happening, um, there are a lot of people whose worlds have fallen apart.
For sure. For sure. We do need to be, thoughtful and respectful about that. Question about living in a high-rise environment in a pandemic. I mean, I walk out my house and I've got, yard and space, but what's it like? I mean, how does that work?
So two things. I'm going to address what it's like, and then I'm going to tell you about how I've cheated a little bit. So the first few days of lockdown, we realized really quickly, and I say lockdown, it was kind of school had already been canceled, the physical presence of school had been canceled. So we realized, okay, we're living in our apartment. And it isn't huge by any means, but we've got like 3 different rooms, 2 baths. We've got 3 kids. The oldest is 9, the youngest is 5, and they're all in school. And I was already starting to do work from home mode. My wife, who's a teacher, was already starting to work from home. And then we've got these 3 kids that are studying from home. And they're legally allowed to go outside, but at this point, playgrounds had already been shut down. And so we just realized really quickly, like, oh, this is going to be tough. Like, this is hard. So we made the decision to go to the family home of my wife's parents' home out of the city, so that we could at least have a little bit more space to breathe. But we already experienced several days of that type of lockdown. And even here, we're not going to the playground and stuff like that. But I'm talking to people every day. So many of my friends that are still in their apartment. I have friends that haven't even stepped foot outside of their apartment. They haven't even gone outside of their building. They've stayed inside for the last few weeks. And it's, on the one hand, a lot of restaurants shut down. They laid off all of their employees. A lot of stores closed. But then there are those stalwarts that are just sticking around, that are still cooking and still providing meals and doing delivery service. So I've even been finding ways to work with them in some of our real estate endeavors. Like, instead of having the typical broker open house where we cater, I've been working with one of my clients to host broker open house, virtual open houses, where instead of catering to the brokers on behalf of each broker, we're taking the money and we're giving it to this local bakery who's taking baked goods out to the hospitals and to feed the frontline workers and stuff like that. So, it's important, I think, to see who still is open in your communities or in any communities, and find ways to get behind them to do whatever you can, just because they're taking a risk, but they're filling a big need.
Absolutely, I agree 100%.
I answered several things for you there, but the answer is, it's tough because New York, you need access to things. Living in a high rise, you can't touch you got to be careful about touching the elevator buttons, about touching common doors, all of this other stuff, because you're living in the same building with other people who could be exposed or who could be positive.
Totally. Last question here. What is your forecast for New York residential real estate market as we move forward into the year?
So I am optimistic. I follow the trends that happen, again, in other cities and states around the U.S., but also on an international level. And I am speaking to clients and buyers that are living abroad right now, some that have been and are currently in China and in Italy, and other what were considered high-risk areas. And I'm talking to them actively, to this day, in fact. And so, I'm hearing how things are going there. I'm noticing some of the surge in housing markets in other places. And while there is a surge, and while we can be hopeful that there will be a little bit of a return, I do think that the prices will take a bit of a hit. And so I'm optimistic, which is to say, people will continue. I'm already seeing this with people that I'm negotiating with right now. They will continue. It isn't going to be, bounce right back to exactly where we were. And so those people that are selling, that have preemptively position themselves with a really strong, price points, they're going to be in a better position than those that were overpricing their units going into this. We right now it's estimated that mid-month in May, our businesses will resume. I mentioned already construction was halted, but a few days ago, like school and some other types of construction have already resumed to some degree. And so, like, I think over the next couple of weeks, as we watch to see if business in general does start to return, I think when business starts to return, that's when we'll start to see whether or not buyer confidence continues to kick into gear, and whether or not more people put their homes on the market. When it happens, we're going to take a little bit of a hit, but again, it is New York, and I'm optimistic.
There you go. All right. Well, listen, everybody. This is John Harrison. If you have any need for real estate in New York, that's your man. Reach out to him. And I want to thank you, Bud, for enlightening us on what's going on.
Dave, thank you absolutely so much, man. It's certainly an honor to be on your show.
We'll catch up. Take care, Bud. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.